Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. We're diving right into the complex world of international railway freight rates today, treating supply chain economics like the ultimate global sport. If you're a policy student wondering how the costs of moving massive amounts of goods stack up across different nations, you are in the perfect place. Let's get right into it.
So, here's the big question right off the bat. Which country actually moves freight for the lowest cost? Figuring out who wins this global race is honestly like a thrilling economic detective story. It's way more than just checking a price tag. We're talking about navigating currencies, geography, and some incredibly intricate government policies.
Here's our quick roadmap for today's explainer. We'll set the global stage, decode the rail math, compare the heavyweights, analyze state-owned versus commercial lines, look at a unique Canadian grain quirk, and finish up with how some networks are beating inflation.
All right, Section 1, the global freight race. Let's set the global stage.
Just take a look at the massive scope of what we're comparing here. We are analyzing an independent examination of railway freight rates spanning from North America, across the pond to European heavyweights like France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, and all the way to Asian powerhouses like India, China, Japan, and Russia. We are talking about billions of dollars in revenue moving across incredibly diverse terrains.
Moving right along to Section 2, decoding the rail math. These are basically the secret decoder rings of economics.
Our first decoder ring is the revenue ton mile, or RTM. This is absolutely crucial because it acts as the ultimate equalizer for measuring actual freight volume across the globe. It literally means 1 ton of revenue-generating freight carried over a distance of exactly 1 mile. So it perfectly accounts for both the sheer weight of the cargo and how far it actually has to travel.
Now, here's the second piece of the puzzle, a concept called purchasing power parity, or PPP for short. This is what keeps wonky, fluctuating exchange rates from totally ruining our data. You see, if we just used standard currency market exchange rates, we'd be in trouble, since railway services aren't traded on open international markets. PPP levels the playing field by creating a fair, common US dollar equivalent so we can finally make a true apples-to-apples comparison.
So, how does this math actually play out? Researchers follow 3 really rigorous steps to calculate the average revenue per RTM, giving us a foolproof global benchmark. First, you gather the total freight revenue and volume. Second, you convert that money into US dollars using our friend PPP. And third, you simply divide that revenue by the RTMs. Boom, you've got your perfectly standardized rate.
I do need to make a quick but super important note about data validation here. For policy analysis, ensuring these numbers are rock solid is everything. The researchers pull this data directly from bulletproof third-party organizations. Think groups like the Association of American Railroads, or AAR, and the International Union of Railways. So when we're looking at these stats, we know they've been thoroughly vetted.
Okay, Section 3, comparing the global heavyweights. This is the ultimate railway leaderboard.
Now, this is where things get really fascinating. Look at the stark contrast in the data. You've got Canada coming in at a highly competitive 4.16 US cents per RTM. But then, look over at the European giants. They're significantly higher. France is sitting at 8.13 cents, and Germany is up at 9.73 cents. And for a bit of local context, the US sits right near Canada at 4.66 cents. So North American commercial railways are just completely crushing the European benchmarks right now.
And wow, we definitely need to talk about Indian railways for a second. Take a look at this, 10.15 US cents per RTM. That is a massive rate, one of the absolute highest among all the nations reviewed, even higher than most of Europe. It really hits home just how vastly different cost structures can be depending on the specific region and the underlying operating model of the network.
Which perfectly leads us into Section 4, state-owned versus commercial. Are we comparing apples to oranges?
Here's the thing you really have to keep in mind. Comparing government-subsidized networks directly to commercial operations is basically comparing apples to oranges. If you just glance at the raw data, Russia and China technically show the lowest rates, somewhere around 3.26 and 3.51 cents, but their railways are entirely state-owned and operated. And as we just saw, India is also government-owned, but they have incredibly high rates.
The reason this matters, and what this really gets at, is transparency. Because state-owned railways, like in Russia or China, can be heavily subsidized by the government, the rate a shipper actually pays doesn't necessarily reflect the true cost of running the railway. That lack of clear data severely limits how valid it is to compare them directly to fully commercial freight networks in North America.
Also, we can't forget that while these national averages are fantastic macroeconomic tools for global policy comparisons, an individual shipper's actual real-world experience is always going to vary. It depends on the specific commodity they're moving, the distance, the volume, you name it. The national average is a great benchmark, but it absolutely doesn't dictate every single local transaction.
All right, Section 5, the Canadian Grain Regulation. Let's look at a really unique policy quirk.
Check this out. Thanks to a highly specific statutory regulation in Canada called the Maximum Revenue Entitlement, or MRE, Western Canadian grain moves at an unbelievably low 2.97 cents per RTM. This is basically a government-mandated ceiling on the total revenues railways can earn from moving this one specific crop. Because of this policy, the implied rate for this grain is actually 29% lower than the overall Canadian average. It's a textbook example of how targeted government regulations can drastically alter national freight rate competitiveness.
And finally, Section 6, beating inflation since 1988. This is kind of the grand finale of Canadian rail economics.
You're going to want to look closely at these data points. Since deregulation back in 1988, commodity prices have absolutely exploded by 120%, and general consumer prices are up 99%. But look at the freight rates. U.S. freight rates only grew by 72%, and Canadian freight rates? They grew by an incredibly low 43%. They haven't just managed inflation, they've fundamentally out-innovated it.
You can really see this friendly cross-border rivalry play out here. Even though both nations have highly integrated supply chains, the data shows that since 2010, Canadian rail rates have actually grown even slower than U.S. rates. In fact, right around 2015, Canadian commercial average freight rates actually dropped below the United States, and they've stayed consistently lower, averaging about 12% below U.S. rates today.
And honestly, these dynamic, continuous operations are exactly why Canada maintains some of the absolute lowest, most competitive commercial freight rates in the entire world. By prioritizing relentless commercial efficiency, massive network integration, and really smart competitive market reforms, they've built an economic powerhouse. They're delivering incredible value to shippers, vastly outperforming their European counterparts, and totally beating back decades of global inflation.
So, we've unpacked some incredible data today. We've decoded the math, compared the global heavyweights, and seen how North America is beating inflation. But I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on. As global supply chains face unprecedented new challenges, who's going to win this economic race in the decades to come? Will it be driven by bold commercial innovations, or will government policies dictate the cheapest freight rates of tomorrow? Keep that in mind the next time you see a massive freight train roll by. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.